Happy Tuesday. Wanted to jump here on the page to talk about something that I've been thinking about and that's brought up by today's podcast episode. And that is kind of the parallels between poker and entrepreneurship. And what I really want to talk about is kind of one of the most important kind of things that I've learned, which is that a lot of times what we see as like the success stories, if you will, as the things that we think, oh, great, this is someone who is actually being successful. When you actually dig in, they're not. And specifically, I want to talk to you about the story in poker, if you don't know it, of Chris Moneymaker. Chris Moneymaker is, in a lot of ways, he's been kind of credited as the person that created the poker renaissance that we have today, because he came about in 2003, I believe it was. He played in the World Series of Poker, which at the time was pretty much the only like $10,000 buy-in event. It was widely considered to be the world championship of poker. Whoever won that was considered the world champion. And he was an amateur. He won his way in on like an $86, what's called a satellite. He played, beat a ton of people at all their money. Then it was pooled, and he made it to the World Series. And so he goes through, and he actually made the final table and won the thing. And he got $2.5 million in winnings from the World Series of Poker. And it was this big thing. Again, with a name like Moneymaker, I mean, he was just made to be a poker player, if you think about it, because, I mean, look, that's just tailor-made for everything about poker. But also, he was just, he was this everyman. He was an accountant. He was not a professional. And so a lot of people saw that, were like, ooh, I could be the next Chris Moneymaker. And so they rushed to the poker world, and you had this huge boom of people in the poker world. And a lot of people were kind of chasing after that experience. And I think about that, and that reminds me of the online entrepreneurship space, because a lot of us hear about the people who have the six-figure launch or maybe even a seven-figure launch, and we're like, wow, that's amazing, because we hear a lot about entrepreneur math. And online entrepreneur math is this thing where everybody talks about all of these wonderful top-line numbers when they're successful, but they don't talk about any of the other stuff. And the reality is, most of the people who are doing that, who are talking about these huge top line, big launch numbers, they're not actually successful. And when you actually look behind the curtain, when you look over the long term, those aren't the people who win. The people who are putting all of their eggs into this, I'm going to have this, multi-six-figure, seven-figure launch, at least early on, those are not the people who win. And that brings me back to the Chris Moneymaker affair. So Chris Moneymaker, after he wins the World Series of Poker in 2003, he decides to quit his job and become a professional poker player. And the beauty is that all poker tournaments like report the results, even like little things where maybe you win $1,000 or a couple $1,000 if you win, they report results. And so we can go and look and see what has happened to him in the, 17 years since then. So total, he's won something like $3.8 million. And that's winnings. That's revenue he's made over the last 17 years. And that, of course, includes that $2.5 million he won the first time. So since that one big hit, he's made $1.3 million, which you're like, oh, well, that's not too bad. Well, when you work it out, it's like $80,000 a year. Now, he was an accountant. And so he would have probably been making more than $80,000 a year. And that $80,000 a year doesn't account for the fact that he had to spend money. He had to pay to get into those tournaments. So he's probably been making $30,000 to $40,000 a year since then. And so I wanted to bring this to you, not as a downer, but it's not that it's wrong and that, he should say we should not be entrepreneurs. I simply want you to be thinking about not saying I want to be Chris Moneymaker, this guy who's this one-hit wonder. Instead, I want you to think about it more like I think about, the successful poker players. They're the ones who grind it, who just are consistent. They don't put all their eggs in one basket. They're consistent about it. They treat it as a business. They don't treat it emotionally. They don't get in over their head. They don't say, I'm going to put all of my future into this one big event. Instead, they spread it out. They spread their risk. Those are the successful poker players. And guess what? Those are also the successful entrepreneurs. Now, look, eventually once you get to be huge as an entrepreneur, you can say, I'm going to launch one time a year and I'm going to make a bunch of money from that. But the problem is you got to get there first. And the way you get there is being consistent and showing up every single day and not thinking, I'm just going to try to be this, big star. And so that's my kind of this analogy that came to my mind when I was thinking about it. And in today's podcast episode, I go into a lot of the different lessons that I learned because, see, I was actually a very avid non-professional poker player for about 10 years. I got drawn in by the moneymaker effect, but I didn't go and start, trying to spend tons of money on those little things. But I did have a lot of money because I was a 20-something with no kid in my, making big law firm money. And so I would do things like sit at a poker table for 36 hours straight with literally no food, no breaks for anything like that. I just got up and went to the bathroom. It was the only time I left the table. I played in some high dollar events. I won my way into those. I didn't, pony up $10,000, but I won my way in, knocked out one of the guys who had won the World Series of Poker a couple years before Moneymaker in one of those events, which was pretty cool. But I was a middling poker player, but I learned some important lessons along the way. And I think a lot of those same lessons are what makes me successful as an entrepreneur. And so that's why today's episode of the podcast, I was just thinking, I want to talk about poker because I like poker. And I think there's some important lessons that everyone can learn from it. So I think it's a really good episode. I've gotten great feedback. Literally, someone already emailed me, said, that she thought I was going to stop after the first lesson, but I gave more and more, and it was really good and really gold. So go check it out. You can see the link here in the actual post itself, but also you can always just go to podcast.bobbyklink.com and you can see that episode and all the prior ones. Or more likely, you could just go to whatever app you use for podcasts and find the show there. It's called the Certified Badass Online Marketing Podcast. I'd love for you to listen. And if you like it, do me a favor, leave a rating and a review so that more people can find out about the podcast. So that's it. I am gonna sign off now. I've got a podcast interview. I'm being interviewed for a podcast with a friend of mine named Kate Dramis, which I'm looking forward to. So until I'm live here again, enjoy, go out and build the badass business of your dreams. Talk to you later.